My writing about anti-racism and inequity is relatively recent, although it's something that I've experienced in a lot of contexts. I grew up in the Caribbean. I lived in Britain as an adult. I visited the US many, many times. I lived in France for a year. And so all of those have played into different experiences of racism and inequity, which now inform the work that I write about. What happened to me, as with many people, well, there are two things. One is that I actually started from my experience of moving to Barbados just before my teenage years, and recognizing how that society operated slightly differently in terms of white centering, I would say. That actually led me to do some research much, much later, which turned into my book, Exploring Shadism. So that, I would say, was probably, which I actually only published the research in 2018. And so that was probably the first step I took along this new path.
So having traveled that much, I'm really curious, do you remember the first time you realized what a microaggression was? Because I could imagine bouncing a bit back and forth between these different cultures. Did you experience any kind of microaggressions that maybe you didn't realize were the case at the time?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that language of microaggressions is relatively recent for me, and maybe for many people, actually. But when I think back and I realize what they were, it happened all the time. I remember being in a workplace in England and having people ask about how I got there. I have been in places where they reached certain conclusions about what my capabilities were. I have had experiences where I've walked into an interview room and seen people do a double take because they didn't expect someone with the name Sharon Hurley, as it was then, to look like me. I had one boss who had so I would say emotional bully tendencies, not necessarily directed only at me as a Black woman. I have to be honest. I think that all the women got that. So yes, I've definitely experienced microaggressions at different times over the years. A lot of my working life before I went freelance, which I am now, was in England, and as I said, I worked in France as well for a year. Lived and worked in France for a year. But of course, as we all know, post-colonial societies, even Black majority spaces, can have these same things as well. It's more usual the other way, but it's not only unique to that, I would say.
For me, having not known that I was being microaggressed, I kind of internalized all of that. And so it was really empowering to find out, like, oh no, like, there's actually a term for that. So it's not just me being oversensitive or overdramatic. And it was a bit of like a healing experience. I'm curious if you kind of felt that too.
Definitely. Having that language to talk about it and to understand that it wasn't something that was just happening to me. Because, in a lot of places that I worked, I was the only Black woman, only Black person, one of only a few. We weren't, even if there was more than one, we weren't in the same department. And so people would say things, and you'd feel bad without fully realizing why you were feeling bad, or you'd feel annoyed. And, and then people will say, but, can't you take a joke? Didn't mean it that way. There was a lot of gaslighting that went on. And, in those circumstances, you're often made to feel like the bad person, the person that's not playing the game, the person that's not playing along. And so having that language of, these are microaggressions really helped put a lot of those past interactions into perspective for me, and starting to have those conversations with other Black people and realizing that this is something that's happening to all of us in an office setting. And it's not that we want it to happen to anybody, but it feels, I don't know if it's a case of misery loves company, or it's a shared healing experience. I don't know quite how to describe it, but it definitely having that language has helped.
How would you say, or what would you say was the process to developing that language? Because I've only recently, and a lot of it in part through like the work that we're doing with Unpack It, have been able to craft language to address microaggressions. Like, what was that process like for you, or what has it been like for you?
Well, what's different for me now, of course, is that I'm a freelancer, so I'm no longer working in an office setting and experiencing it day to day in that setting. There've been experiences online where people have been unkind, where people have white-splained, where all those sorts of experiences. I think what has been different is in understanding what these are and learning more about them myself. I've come to realize that the way that you counter those is to ask people to think again, to make them confront what they are actually trying to say, what is lying behind it. If you simply saying to someone, "What did you mean by that?" can be very empowering, because you can do that. You don't have to be nasty to them. You can just say, "Okay, what did you mean by that?" And as they try to explain it, then it becomes very clear to them whether or not it was appropriate.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most powerful tools we have, is just to ask that question.
I've done that to a few people, and I've noticed that there's like this complete face shift where they're like, either they knew what they meant by it, or they realized that in saying what they said, they didn't realize what they were actually saying. That is super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to talk a bit more about your work. I know that you've written a book.
Yes.
And so can you tell me a little bit more about those?
Okay, sure. So there are a number of things. The book came out of some research that I did about colorism. At the time, I called it shadeism because that's what it was called in the Caribbean, which is where I'm from. But most people now talk about it as colorism, discrimination on the basis of the shade of your skin, which happens a lot in Black post-enslavement and post-colonial communities, and within the Indian communities as well. What is very interesting to me is that I published the book recently based on research that I had done some time back, and people who read it invariably come up to me and say, "Yeah, this is still happening to me." And they share something that happened to them last week or last month. This is not something that has gone away at all. Apart from that, I've been working with Omnis School, doing anti-racism workshops. I co-host these with Leah Jovi Ford, who is a woman of Filipino ethnic origin. And so we share our different experiences of racism with the participants. And in sharing those stories, I find that's a very powerful tool to help them to walk a little bit in our shoes as far as is possible for them, and to understand what it feels like to be us. And then to start talking about, okay, how can you push back against this in your environment? So that is very much the focus of that. Following on from that, we have an allies group, Omnis Anti-Racism Circle, which is where the people who have attended that workshop and other people who are interested, because we're about to broaden it out, can come and work with us. We discuss stuff that's going on. So, for example, we discussed the Harry and Meghan interview. We discussed, reactions to in the Capitol, from the point of view of a Black or brown person. We read books and discuss them. We have people come in and speak. So we had someone come in and speak about microaggressions. We had someone come in and talk about the use of language. Also with Omnis, I'm doing anti-racism classes, which I ran in person, but they're now self-directed with some drop-in sessions so we can come and discuss things. For example, the last time we had a drop-in, one of the sessions that I had put together was about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And we had some stories recently about, how survivors of that event were still alive. So we had a discussion about that idea that we have that That nothing was there before someone came and put whatever, white supremacy thought was right to be there. And B, the idea that this was all such a long time ago, but if people are still alive, it wasn't that long ago, And then the last thing that I'm doing is that last year I launched an anti-racism newsletter where I talk about experiences and share my perspectives, but I also used it as a way to get other Black creators and writers' ideas out there to other people. So I do a series where I interview Black anti-racism writers and get them to share some of their work and something about their journey. And I have another regular feature which I call my reading list, which is here's all the interesting stuff that I've read and here's why I thought it was interesting and here's a key quote. So just to get more of that stuff out there. So, aiming to fight racism one article at a time and have a ripple effect where we're basically dismantling white supremacy and anti-Black racism with every article we read or write.
I love it. I love it so much. I get super excited when people have things that they are really passionate about and when they're solving problems. And I don't even know how you manage your time. I'm in awe. What have you found to be the most challenging aspect of your work and the most fulfilling part of your work?
The most challenging part is probably having the time to fit it all in. Because I've actually been changing focus so that this becomes part of my day-to-day work as well. I'm a freelancer, and now I'm shifting focus intentionally to help people talk more authentically about their diversity initiatives and their anti-racism work. The most fulfilling part, I would say, comes when I see someone who has attended a class or a workshop or an allies group meeting, or who has read an article, get an epiphany, learn something that makes a difference to how they're going to behave from now on, or how they're going to think about something. These changing ideas and changing minds is really powerful. And so when I see people start to get it, that is what it's just absolutely thrilling.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I guess my last question would be, where can people find you? And where people can find you at?
Okay, so people can find me at www.antiracismnewsletter.com. They can find me, so that's my newsletter. They can find me at sharonhh.com. That's my regular website. They can find me at theintrovertsisters.com, which is the podcast that I co-host with my sister, where we sometimes talk, because we're both Black women, so we talk about racism and anti-racism there too. And at omnischool.com. And I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn as well, and Instagram.
Well, thank you so much. You are as inspiring as you are on Instagram. I'm so happy that I got a chance to talk to you. I think people are really going to enjoy this conversation, and you're super insightful. I'm so thankful that you took time.
Thank you, Kashara. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And keep up the good work. I think this is a great thing that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It's encouraging.